My name is Emily Collins. I'm 29, and I read money for a living. I find the dollar that lies. 300 guests. A $2 million wedding I didn't pay for. And a microphone in the hand of my new father-in-law, Richard Morgan, pointing straight at my mother. Someone checked the seating chart, he said, smiling. I think someone wandered in off the street and found the rich man's table.
The room laughed.
My mother, who scrubbed floors for 20 years to raise me, stood up. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. Do you even know who I am? She asked him. Richard's smile cracked, just slightly. And that's when the doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and a stranger walked in with 2 police officers and a gray file box under his arm. What none of those laughing people knew was that my father hadn't abandoned us. He'd been alive the whole time. And Richard Morgan knew exactly where. Growing up in Marion, Ohio, dinner most nights was whatever didn't cost much and lasted 2 days. I remember the smell of our apartment kitchen, powdered milk, the metallic tang of the same pot my mother used for everything. She'd get home from the diner around 11, still smelling of fryer grease, and start the second job an hour later, scrubbing floors at the medical building on Delaware Avenue. Eat, Emmy, she'd say, sliding half a sandwich across the table, keeping the crust for herself. I was 7 before I understood she wasn't just picky about crusts. I asked about my father exactly once a year, usually near my birthday. The answer never changed. He left a letter. Mary told me when I was 9, sitting on the edge of my bed, the hallway light cutting a yellow line across the floor. Said he needed a different life. That's all there was to it, baby. Some people just aren't built to stay. Can I see it? The letter? I threw it away a long time ago. Her voice went flat when she said it, the way it never did for anything else. Nothing good comes from keeping things like that. I didn't push. Kids learn early which doors in a house are locked, and I'd learned mine was the one marked John Collins. What I did instead was count things. I counted the tips in her apron on nights. She let me sort the coins. I counted how many weeks until the electric bill was due, because I'd catch her doing the same math out loud, lips moving over numbers at the kitchen table at midnight. Somewhere in there a belief took root in me, quiet but total. Numbers don't lie. People do. My father's letter was proof of that, a person, in ink, telling us exactly what he wanted us to believe, then walking away clean. So I studied accounting at Ohio State on a partial scholarship and 2 jobs of my own, and when a professor mentioned forensic auditing, the discipline of finding the transaction someone tried to bury, something in my chest recognized it before my brain did. I built a career out of reading ledgers for the lie hiding in them. By 29, I was good enough at it that Halloran and Pierce, a small forensic firm in Columbus, let me run point on cases alone. I like to tell people, half joking, that I find the dollar that lies. I met Daniel Morgan at a conference in April, both of us bored through a keynote on infrastructure financing, both of us the only ones laughing at the same dry joke from the panelist. He was an architect, tall in a way that made him fold himself carefully into chairs, and he listened like he was taking notes even when he wasn't. 3 months in, he brought me to meet his parents at a restaurant in Dublin, Ohio, with white tablecloths and a wine list heavier than my grad school textbooks. Morgan, his father said when we shook hands, gripping mine a beat too long. Richard Morgan. Daniel's told us so little about you, which tells me he's serious. Richard smiled the way men do when they're used to being obeyed. His wife, Linda, said almost nothing that night, just watched her husband with an expression I couldn't place until much later. When I told my mother his last name, over the phone in my apartment kitchen, there was a silence longer than any pause in a normal conversation. Morgan, she repeated. Just the one word. Yeah, Richard and Linda Morgan, they own that development company, the one with the buildings downtown. I have to go, Emmy. Something's on the stove. I heard her voice catch on nothing.
No pan clattered. No stove hissed.
When I called back 20 minutes later, she picked up sounding normal again, tired, said she'd just gotten lightheaded standing too fast. I let it go. I had a closing statement due for a client the next morning, a fraud case involving a plumbing supply company skimming inventory, and my mind was elsewhere. I didn't ask again. That's the kind of detail you only understand you should have chased after everything else has already happened. The wedding planning moved fast once the Morgans got involved. Faster than Daniel or I expected. Faster than made sense for two people who'd offered, unprompted, to cover everything. A ballroom at the Ritz downtown. 300 guests. A budget number Richard mentioned once, almost carelessly, at another dinner. $2 million, like he was commenting on the weather. 2 million, I repeated, and almost laughed. Richard, that's Daniel, does he mean that? Daniel just shrugged, embarrassed. He does this. Let him have it, It makes him happy to write big checks. I told my mother the number over the phone that night. She went quiet, the same quiet as before, then covered it with a joke about rich people and their flowers. I laughed along with her and didn't notice, not until much later, how tightly she must have been gripping the phone. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep, and I went looking for a glass of water in my mother's kitchen. The light was off. She was sitting at the table in the dark, a photograph in her hands, thumb moving slowly across its surface like she was trying to wear the image smoother than it already was. I couldn't see the picture, only the shape of her shoulders, curled the way they used to curl over unpaid bills. Mom? She didn't jump. She'd known I was standing there. I shouldn't have let you walk into that house, she said, not looking up. I should have told you everything a long time ago. I didn't answer. She set the photograph face down on the nightstand and finally looked at me, and I told her whatever it was could wait until after the wedding, because the florist needed a final head count by 6 a.m. and I had 200 place cards left to alphabetize. She let me believe that. I have wondered since whether she wanted me to press harder. I didn't. The Ritz downtown had a ballroom with ceilings so high the chandeliers looked like they were floating in weather of their own. 300 chairs faced a stage banked in white peonies that alone, I'd later learn, cost $11,000. I stood at the top of the aisle in a dress Richard's wedding planner had chosen from 3 options, none of which I'd been allowed to see before the final fitting, and I watched Daniel's face when I appeared in the doorway, and for about 4 minutes I forgot to be afraid of anything. Mary sat in the second row, not the first. Linda Morgan had explained, gently, that the front row was for immediate family, and Mary was, technically, mother of the bride, but there'd been a seating chart revision, and would Mary mind terribly? Mary said she wouldn't mind at all. She wore the navy dress she'd bought on clearance at a Kohl's outside Marion, and she'd had her hair done at the same salon she'd gone to for 30 years, and she looked, I thought, like the most honest person in the room. Dinner service ended around 9. The band lowered their volume. Richard Morgan stood, tapped a fork against a champagne flute until the sound cut through 300 conversations, and took the microphone from its stand with the easy confidence of a man who had given this kind of toast 100 times. Emily, he said, turning to find me at the head table. When Daniel told us he was bringing home a girl from Ohio, I'll admit, Linda and I wondered what kind of family we'd be joining. Warm laughter. He smiled into it. But you have shown this family nothing but grace since the day we met you. Welcome to the Morgans. Applause. I felt my shoulders drop an inch I hadn't known were raised. And of course, Richard went on, we have to acknowledge the woman who raised her. He lifted his glass toward Mary's table. Mary Collins, waitress, housekeeper. He said the words carefully, like he was reading a resume he found mildly amusing. 29 years by herself on, what was it, Emily, minimum wage plus tips? I didn't answer.
My mouth had gone dry.
It's really something, Richard said, and here his voice shifted, just slightly, the warmth thinning into something with an edge underneath it, watching a woman climb out of a 2-bedroom apartment in Marion and end up at a table like this one. I mean that as a compliment, Mary. Truly. He paused, let the room lean in. Though I have to say, when my assistant told me the flower budget alone was more than most people's houses, I thought, well, some folks work their whole lives for a seat at a table like this. And some folks just need a daughter who marries well. The laughter that followed was smaller than before, uncertain, the kind that comes because people don't know what else to do with their faces. Someone at table 9 laughed too loud, and then stopped. I heard the word beggar before I understood I'd heard it. Richard hadn't quite said it. He'd circled it, climbing tables she didn't build, crashing a rich man's dinner, and by the time the sentence finished, the meaning had landed anyway, clean and cruel, in every ear in that ballroom. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at his father with his jaw slightly open, one hand half raised off the table as if he meant to stop something but hadn't decided what yet. Mary stood up. Her chair scraped against the marble floor, a thin metallic shriek that cut clean through the band's soft cover of some jazz standard nobody was listening to anymore. 300 faces turned. She didn't reach for the microphone. She didn't need to. The room had gone that quiet. Her hands were shaking. I could see it from the head table, the navy fabric of her sleeve trembling against her wrist. But her voice, when it came, didn't shake at all. "Do you know who I am, Richard?" For words. Nothing else. She didn't explain, didn't raise her voice, didn't cry. She just stood there in her clearance rack dress under $11,000 of peonies and asked him that, and something happened to Richard's face that I had never seen happen to it before. A flicker. There and gone. Like a man checking a door he thought he'd locked years ago. He recovered fast. Almost fast enough. "I know exactly who you are," he said, smiling again, reaching for his glass. The doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. Nobody had signaled them. There was no reason for the doors to open at 9:40 at night in the middle of a wedding, and yet they did, both of them, wide, and the sound carried. A heavy mechanical clunk of hardware swinging on hinges built for grand entrances, and every head in that room turned a second time. A thin man walked in first. Gray suit, gray face, an oxygen cannula looped under his nose that I hadn't noticed at first because of the distance, carrying nothing but a gray cardboard file box against his hip like it weighed more than he did. Behind him came two police officers in uniform, unhurried, scanning the room the way people scan a room when they already know exactly who they're looking for. The thin man stopped 15 feet from the head table. He looked past me, past Daniel, straight at Richard. "Hello, Richard," he said. 20 years. I came to give back what you forced me to keep silent about." Richard's champagne flute slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble. Two officers moved to stand at the ballroom doors, arms crossed, not touching their belts, just present. Nobody left. 300 chairs stopped scraping. The man with the oxygen tank set his cart down beside the head table. Up close, I could see the cannula tubing looping under his nose, the way his suit hung on him like it belonged to a bigger, healthier man from another year. "My name is David Brooks," he said. His voice didn't shake, though his hands did. 22 years ago, I worked as a staff accountant at Hudson Medical Center in Columbus. Mary Collins was my supervisor. I heard the sound before I understood it, a chair leg dragging back too fast, wood on marble. My mother had stood, then folded straight down into her seat, one hand gripping the tablecloth so hard the centerpiece rocked. "Mom." I was at her side before I decided to move. Her face had gone the color of the napkins. "Mom, what is he talking about?" She didn't answer me. She was looking at David Brooks like he was something that had climbed out of a grave. Richard had recovered his footing near the podium, dabbing at champagne on his sleeve with a cocktail napkin, and when he spoke his voice carried the practiced boom of a man used to rooms listening to him. "This is a private event. Officers, I don't know who let this person in, but he is clearly unwell and confused."
I'm Richard.
David said it flatly, the way you'd report the weather. "Stage 4. I have maybe 4 months. I am not confused. I've just run out of reasons to stay quiet." That stopped Richard's mouth mid-sentence. I watched it happen the exact second his face recalculated. David set the gray file box on the head table, next to the wedding cake topper, which struck me even then as an obscene juxtaposition. He opened it with fingers that trembled, but didn't fumble. "Hudson Medical ran a charity fund back then," he said, "to the room now, not just to Richard. For pediatric patients whose families couldn't cover treatment. I did the books alongside Mary. She found $81,000 missing from the fund over 6 months. Small draws. Careful ones. She brought it to me because she trusted me, and I told her to report it up the chain." "David." My mother's voice cracked on his name. "Don't. I have to marry. I should have said this 20 years ago." He looked at her, and something passed over his face that looked almost like an apology. She reported it. 2 weeks later, she was fired. The hospital said her own signature was on the fraudulent disbursement forms. I want to be very clear in front of these officers, in front of everyone here. I saw those forms, and the signature was not right. I knew Mary's handwriting. I'd watched her sign 1,000 requisitions. That wasn't her hand. The forensic part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through 4 years of a degree nobody in Marion understood the point of, reached out before I could stop it. I need to see those. David looked at me, really looked like he was seeing my face for a resemblance he already half expected, and slid a folder across the table. I opened it on the corner of the head table, champagne pooling near my elbow, 300 people watching me the way you watch a car accident. The disbursement form was on top, yellowed at the edges, a photocopy of a photocopy. Mary Collins. The signature. I'd spent 6 years reading signatures for a living. Loop height, baseline pressure. The habitual hitch where a writer's pen lifts before the final stroke. My mother signs her C low and closed, like she's protecting it. This C was open, generous, wrong. This isn't your signature, I said to her, quiet, like it was just the two of us.
Mom.
This isn't your signature. She was crying without making any sound, which was somehow worse than if she'd sobbed. Daniel had come around the table and was standing near his father now, but not next to him, a foot of distance that felt like it meant something. Dad. His voice had an edge I'd never heard him use with Richard. What is he talking about? I have no idea what ancient grudge this man is dragging in here, Richard said. On my son's wedding day, no less, which tells you everything about his character. Someone forged this, I said, louder now, not looking up from the page. Someone forged my mother's signature on a document that got her fired and destroyed her name, and I am looking at the proof of it right now. I kept turning pages because I couldn't stop myself, because 22 years of my mother flinching at bank statements and refusing store credit and working 2 shifts so she'd never again owe anyone anything suddenly had a shape, a cause, a first domino. Near the back of the file was an internal memo, typed, a name blacked out in later pen and then re-inked over as if someone had tried twice to make sure it disappeared. Beside it, in a cramped handwritten note that wasn't David's rounder script, witness, J.C., handled. I looked up at my mother. Who's J.C.? Her mouth opened. Nothing came for a second. Then it broke out of her like something she'd been holding underwater for 20 years. That's your father. I didn't answer her at first. My mother just kept staring at the hollow place on David Brooks's chest where the oxygen tube disappeared under his collar, like the answer to everything was written there. Mom. I put my hand flat against her back. Her blouse was damp. Say that again. Your father. Her voice cracked down the middle. John Collins. JC, that's what they wrote in the file. Nobody handled him, Emily. He went looking for the proof that I didn't steal that money, and he never came home. Richard's laugh came out wrong, too loud, aimed at the room instead of at us. This is theater. This woman, he pointed at David, whose hand had gone white-knuckled around his cane, has been extorting me for a year. Cancer patients say all kinds of things when they're bargaining for a settlement. I have never asked you for $1, David said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I have 4 months. I'm not spending them for money. Officers. Richard turned, smooth again, a man remembering he owned a room. I don't know what story he's selling you, but I'd like him escorted out. This is my son's wedding. One of the officers, a woman with a notepad already out, didn't move. Sir, we'll need everyone to stay where they are. That was when Linda stood up. She'd been sitting at the family table the entire time, spine straight, hands folded over a small clutch purse the color of dried blood. I'd spoken to her twice in 3 months, once about flowers, once about a seating chart, and both times she'd smiled with her mouth only. I had filed her away as decorative. Furniture with a pulse. She walked to the center of the floor in low heels that made almost no sound on the marble, and she stopped an arm's length from her husband. Linda. Richard's voice changed register.
Not anger now.
Caution. Sit down. I've been sitting down for 20 years, Richard. She opened the clutch. Her hands were steady in a way that told me she'd rehearsed this. Maybe in a bathroom mirror. Maybe in a parked car outside a lawyer's office. You filed the new will in March. You had Andrew draft a postnup in June. You've been telling the Hendersons you're restructuring your affairs. She looked at him. I read the drafts. I'm not in them anymore. That is a private family matter. I have nothing left to protect by staying quiet. She held up her phone. The screen lit her face blue white. So, I'm not going to. The room had gone the particular kind of silent where you can hear the air conditioning. 300 people who'd spent the last 10 minutes gasping now sat with their forks suspended, their champagne going flat, waiting. Linda pressed play. The audio was tinny, recorded through a phone speaker held too close to another phone, the kind of sound that comes from a woman standing in a doorway she wasn't supposed to be standing in. But the voice was unmistakable. It was the voice that had just called my mother a beggar in front of 300 people. Can't keep paying Willow Creek out of the operating account. It'll show up in an audit eventually. Routed through the foundation. Same as always. A second voice, further away, tinnier. And if he starts talking again? Staff said he had a lucid stretch last month. He doesn't remember his own name. We gave him a new one. James Cole isn't going anywhere. A pause, ice against glass. I handled John 20 years ago, and I'll handle this. We are not having this conversation again. Linda stopped the recording. Nobody in that ballroom moved. My mother's hand found mine and gripped it hard enough to hurt, and I welcomed the pain because it was the only thing keeping the floor from tilting. Willow Creek, I said. The word came out of me before I decided to say it. That's a name. That's a place. It's a care facility, Linda said, not looking at me, looking at her husband. In Zanesville. I followed the payments for 3 years before I understood what they were for. I told myself I didn't know for sure. I told myself a lot of things, Richard, the way you taught me to. Richard's face had stopped performing. Whatever was underneath it now was not a man worried about his reputation. It was a man doing arithmetic, fast, looking for an exit that wasn't there. That recording is illegally obtained, he said, but his voice had lost its floor. It's inadmissible. It's out of context. Sir. The officer with the notepad stepped forward now, and her partner moved with her. I'm going to need you to come with us. I turned to my mother. Her face had gone the color of the tablecloth, but her eyes were locked on mine, and for the first time in my whole life I watched her do arithmetic too. 20 years of a story, she had told herself, dissolving in real time. I gripped her hand tighter, both of us holding on now. Willow Creek, I said again, low, just for her. It's a nursing home.
Mom.
Dad is alive. Richard's control broke all at once, the way a dam doesn't crack slowly. Get out. All of you, get out of my son's wedding. Get your hands off me. The cuffs closed around his wrists with a sound like a door locking from the outside, and 300 people watched the richest man most of them had ever met get walked out of his own ballroom in handcuffs, past the wedding cake, past the ice sculpture already beginning to weep, past his wife, who did not look away. The station released everyone else close to midnight. I did not go home. Detective Ruiz met me at a folding table in a room that smelled like burnt coffee, a laptop open between us, my own laptop beside it, because she'd asked if I could read financial records faster than her analyst could pull them. You're not law enforcement, she said. So understand, anything you find, you tell me. You don't act on it yourself. I do this for a living, I said. Forensic auditing. I read dirty books for a business consulting firm in Columbus. I'm not going to do anything except read. She slid me a stack of subpoenaed statements, Morgan Family Foundation, 5 different accounts going back 22 years. I put on my glasses and started where I always start, the boring rows, the recurring ones. Most of the foundation's giving was exactly what you'd expect from a man who liked his name on hospital wings, large, irregular, photographed. But buried under 4 different account numbers, I found a wire that repeated every single month, same day, same 3-digit variance, going back further than I could immediately trace. $4,200, then $4,350, then $4,600, rising slowly, The way costs rise when nobody's watching the bill. The payee was a shell, Wellstone Advisory Group LLC, registered in Delaware, no website, no employees I could find. Wellstone's only outgoing transfer every month went to one place, Willow Creek Care Home. I sat very still. Then I opened a browser tab and looked it up. A residential facility outside Zanesville, Ohio, 90 minutes from where I grew up in Marion. Detective. My voice came out flatter than I meant it to. I need you to look at this. She leaned over my shoulder, read the trail twice, and picked up her phone without a word. By the time I called the facility myself, it was past midnight, and I told myself I was only confirming a hunch, the way I'd tell myself before pulling a thread in an audit, just checking, just ruling it out. A tired-voiced woman answered on the fourth ring, said she was the night charge nurse. I'm calling about a resident, I said. James Cole. There was a pause, long enough that I heard a cart will squeak somewhere behind her. And you are? I didn't have a good answer for that. Family, I said, and it came out of my mouth before I decided it was true. He's been with us a long time, she said, careful, professional. You'll need to come in person for anything beyond that, ma'am. I can't just.
Please.
I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Something in it must have carried anyway, because she softened. He's got some cognitive impairment. Memory. Been here, gosh, I want to say close to 20 years now, on and off different placements before that.
Kvittman.
Doesn't say much. Folds his napkin the exact same way every meal, corners in first, then in half, like he used to do it for a living. My mother was standing in the doorway of the room by then. I hadn't heard her come in. She'd been in the hallway giving her own statement to a different detective, and something had pulled her toward my voice. Ask her about a scar, Mary said. I hadn't told her what I was calling about. I don't know how she knew. I asked. There is a scar, the nurse said, slower now, like she was picturing him. Above the left eyebrow. He gets confused if you touch near it. Doesn't like it. My mother made a sound I'd never heard her make before, not crying exactly, something that came from lower than that. She sat down hard in the plastic chair beside me and put both hands flat on the table, like she needed to feel something solid. That's him, she said. Emily, that's him. I asked the nurse one more question, the one that mattered most, the one my whole chest was braced for. Does he ever say anything? Any names? He repeats himself sometimes. 2 words, mostly. My wife. My son. A pause. We always figured he lost track of the details. Poor thing's been alone as long as I've worked here. Not son. My mind snagged on it and let it go, because it didn't matter, because the words were close enough to break something open in me anyway. 22 years. A napkin folded the same careful way at every meal, in a building I'd never seen, while I sat at a kitchen table in Marion being told my father chose to leave. He hadn't chosen anything. I want to come see him, Mary said.
Tonight. Now.
Ma'am, visiting hours don't start until. Please, I said again, and this time I heard how much I sounded like her. The nurse exhaled, and when she spoke again her voice had dropped, gone quieter, like she was cupping the phone closer to her mouth. Look, I probably shouldn't say this, but it's strange timing. About an hour ago, somebody called on behalf of the family. Said there's a transfer planned first thing tomorrow morning. Urgent relocation, they said. Different facility, didn't say which. The room went cold around me in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Who called it in? I said. I don't have that information, hon, just that it's happening at 7 a.m. I looked at the clock on Detective Ruiz's wall. 12:14, and I heard the nurse's voice drop lower still, half to herself. Strange thing, though. Someone from the family calling to say they'll move the old man to another facility first thing tomorrow morning. Ice moved down my spine. I did not tell Mary about the call yet. I asked the nurse to hold everything and hung up, my heart still catching up with my hands. What is it? Mary said. She was standing in the doorway of the room, arms crossed like she already knew the answer was going to cost her something. Someone's trying to move Dad before we can get to him. She didn't sit down. She reached for her coat. We drove to the Hudson Medical Records Annex on Delaware Avenue at 1 in the morning, because Reyes, the paralegal helping the detective's office, had gotten us clearance to pull Mary's old personnel file before a judge could argue jurisdiction in the morning. The building was mostly dark, one security guard at a folding table, a row of gray filing cabinets that smelled like dust and toner. Reyes met us at the elevator with a cardboard box already pulled, Mary Collins printed on the label in a stranger's handwriting. "This is everything they kept," Reyes said. "Personnel file, termination letter, and a folder marked family correspondence. That one's yours, Mrs. Collins." Mary's hand stopped over the box lid. "I never gave anyone family correspondence. It's dated the year you were let go." She opened it herself. I watched her fingers go through 3 thin pages before they landed on a 4th, and I watched her face change the way ice changes right before it cracks. No visible break yet, just a wrongness under the surface. "That's not possible," she said. I took it from her hands because she couldn't hold it steady anymore. It was a single typed page, and signed in ink but signed in typescript. John Collins. Dated 11 days after Mary was fired. "I want you to stop looking for me. I'm not coming back. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I had heard about this letter my entire life. I had built a father out of it, a man who left, who chose to disappear rather than fight for us. I had never seen the actual paper. Mary had told me she'd burned it years ago, in the sink, because she couldn't stand to keep it in the house. "You said you burned this," I said. "I burned a copy someone sent me at the apartment. I never saw the original." Her voice had gone very flat, the way it did when she was trying not to feel something in front of me. It came in an envelope with no return address. I read it once, and I believed every word of it. Reyes was already turning the page over, angling it toward the fluorescent light. "Look at the letterhead. Bottom corner. Faint, embossed, almost invisible unless you tilted it, a watermark. Morgan Family Holdings." Nobody said anything for a moment. I could hear the ballast in the ceiling light humming. "He didn't write this," I said. "Richard's company printed this." Mary sat down hard in the folding chair by the cabinets, the kind with a rip in the vinyl seat, and put both hands over her mouth. 22 years. She had told me my father was a coward who signed a letter and vanished. She had taught me that story like scripture, and she had believed it herself. Every year, every birthday I didn't get a card for, every father-daughter dance I sat out. And it had been built for her, on purpose, by the man who'd had John locked away under a stranger's name the whole time. "I stopped looking," she said, quiet to no one. "After that letter came, I stopped looking for him. I told myself he made his choice." She looked up at me. If I hadn't stopped, if I'd kept pushing.
"Don't," I said.
"That's exactly what they wanted you to think." We still had one real hope left, something concrete enough to hand a prosecutor. John had kept a work journal at Hudson Medical, notes on the fund discrepancies, the kind of thing a careful man keeps when he doesn't trust the people above him. Reyes had flagged it in the old case index. She pulled the corresponding box. It was empty except for an intake slip. "Destroyed per records retention policy, signed off 18 years ago, the signature illegible, the approving department listed as legal, Morgan Family Holdings." 18 years ago. Richard had reached into this building and erased my father twice, once from Mary's belief in him, once from the paper trail that could have proven what he knew. "That means the paper is gone," Reyes said. "Whatever's left, it's not going to be in a filing cabinet. It's going to be a person who was there. Someone who remembers." I thought of David Brooks, 63 years old, dying by inches, still keeping his mouth shut after 20 years of silence. And I thought of my father, somewhere in a bed under a name that wasn't his, the only other person who had actually seen what Richard did. "John's the only one left who lived it start to finish," I said. "If Brooks won't talk before he dies, Dad is all we have." Mary's phone buzzed on the table between us. Daniel had texted her, not me. "My father wants me to say nothing to Emily until his lawyer calls." "Mary, I'm sorry. I don't know what to do." I read it over Mary's shoulder and felt something in my chest go very still and very quiet, the opposite of panic. Then my own phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, area code local. I almost let it go to voicemail. Is this Emily? Emily Collins. The voice was male, older, shaking in a way that had nothing to do with a bad signal.
Who is this?
I drive for Mr. Morgan. 12 years I've driven for him. A breath uneven. You're his daughter, aren't you?
Yes.
Where's my father? We're on the road to Willow Creek. They're moving him tonight, before anyone can get a court order to stop it. His voice cracked. I don't want to be the one who put my hands on this. I don't want to be part of a man getting killed just because I kept my mouth shut and did my job. The line went dead before I could answer him. I stood there with the phone still against my ear, listening to nothing. Daniel was already grabbing his keys. My mother stood a few feet away, one hand braced against the wall, like the floor had tilted. That was the driver, I said.
He's stalling.
He's driving John to Willow Creek right now to move him somewhere else before morning.
Then we go, Mary said.
Her voice didn't shake. That surprised me more than anything that had happened all night. Detective Ruiz picked up on the second ring. I gave her the address and the time, 12:21 a.m., and she told us to meet the cruiser at the end of our street, not to go alone, not to do anything except drive. I heard her radio crackling before she hung up. We took Daniel's car. Ohio at that hour is a stretch of black highway and gas station light, and none of us spoke for the first 11 miles. I watched the exit signs count down, Route 23, then the turn for Delaware County, and I kept doing the math I'd been doing for 6 hours. Willow Creek was 31 minutes from the archive building. We'd left at 12:14. If the van left before us, we were behind. He won't hurt him, Daniel said to no one. He wouldn't. Not his own. He's not his own anything, Mary said quietly. He's been paying for a stranger named James Cole for 20 years. That's not a father-in-law worrying about a patient. That's a man erasing a witness. Daniel's knuckles went white on the wheel. He didn't argue with her again. The police cruiser caught up to us near the Route 42 split, lights off, just a shape in the mirror until it pulled alongside and Ruiz waved us to follow. We took the last 4 miles at a speed that made the fence posts blur. My phone buzzed, the driver again, a single text this time. He's not moving fast. Told them the transmission's slipping. I can't stall much longer. I read it twice and put the phone in my lap, face up, because I needed to see it if he wrote again. Willow Creek Care Home sat back from the road behind a low brick wall, its windows mostly dark except for the lobby, and one wing lit pale blue by night shift fluorescence. As we turned into the lot, I saw it, a white transport van, engine running, back doors open, a hydraulic lift lowered halfway to the pavement. A man in scrubs stood beside it with a clipboard, and another man, heavy-set, in a company polo, was arguing with him about paperwork that clearly didn't exist. Ruiz's cruiser swung in at an angle that blocked the van's path before it had fully turned toward the exit lane. 2 more units came in behind us, no sirens, just doors opening and closing in the cold. I heard Ruiz say, "Nobody get on that lift," and the aide in scrub stepped back so fast his clipboard hit the ground. The heavy-set man started talking immediately, fast, about a routine transfer, about family authorization, about, "I just drive where they tell me." Ruiz didn't look at him. She was already walking toward the van. Mary got there first. She climbed the 2 low steps into the back of the van where a wheelchair sat locked against the rail, and inside it, wrapped in a gray blanket someone had tucked too tightly around his shoulders, was a man staring out the small side window at nothing. His hair had gone white and thin. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, pale and old, shaped like a comma. "John," Mary said. Her voice cracked on the single syllable, not loud, not a sob, just a small fracture in a word she hadn't said out loud in 22 years. He didn't turn right away. When he did, his eyes moved over her face the way you'd look at a house you used to live in, recognizing the shape of it without remembering why it mattered. His mouth opened. Nothing came for a second. Then, barely above a whisper, in a voice worn thin from disuse, "My wife. My son. Not daughter." He'd gotten it wrong, or his mind had folded around a version of us that had never quite existed. It didn't matter. Mary made a sound I'd never heard her make and took his hand in both of hers like she was afraid it would be taken back. I stood at the base of the steps and didn't move. 29 years old, and I had never once stood in front of my own father. I'd built a career on reading what people couldn't say out loud in numbers and signatures, and now I couldn't find a single word for the man mumbling my wife, my son into my mother's shoulder. Miss Collins, a woman in scrubs, the charge nurse, badge reading Nora Alvarez, touched my arm gently. "You're the daughter?" He's been asking for someone for a long time. Not by name, just asking. I nodded because I couldn't do much else.
"There's something you should have," Nora said.
"He's kept it under his mattress for as long as I've worked here. Wouldn't let anyone touch it. I always figured it was nothing, an old man's habit. But given tonight, I think you'd better see it." She walked back into the building and returned 2 minutes later carrying a small rusted tin, the kind cough drops used to come in, its lid dented at one corner. She held it out to me with both hands, like it weighed more than it looked.
"He wrote something."
Years ago, before he stopped being able to. He never let it out of his sight. I took the tin. My hands weren't steady when I opened it. Inside, folded into quarters and soft at the creases from being unfolded 1,000 times, was a scrap of paper gone yellow at the edges. I smoothed it flat against my palm. The handwriting was uneven, some letters pressed hard enough to tear through, others trailing off like the pen had shaken, but I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on the back of an old photograph in my mother's closet, on a birthday card from when I was 6. It was his. A string of numbers. 11 digits, then a dash, then 4 more. Beneath it, in smaller letters, barely legible, Richard M. Offshore. Don't let them say I stole it. Mom. My voice didn't sound like mine. Mom, look. Mary turned from John, still holding his hand, and I held the paper up so the van's overhead light caught it. She read it once, then again, her lips moving without sound. "That's an account number," she whispered. "That's the account. 22 years, and he kept it. He kept it the whole time." Ruiz was beside me now, pulling on a glove before she'd even fully processed what I was holding. "Don't touch it any more than you have to," she said, and there was something almost gentle under the procedure in her voice. "Miss Collins, this could be exactly what we need. But I have to ask you something, and I need you to think before you answer." I looked at her. "If this holds up, if we can trace that number, if a judge accepts a statement from a man in his condition, this doesn't just confirm what you already believe. It could put your father-in-law away." She glanced past me, toward John, who had gone quiet again, his eyes drifting back to the window like none of us were there. "But I need to know if he's competent to testify. And right now, I don't know that anyone can tell me that." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across a folding table in a room that smelled like burnt coffee, David's file open on one side, a printout of Linda's flash drive transcript on the other, and John's scrap of paper between them like the last piece of a jigsaw nobody thought would ever close. The numbers matched, all 11 digits. Wellstone Advisory Group had received $81,000 from the Hudson Medical Children's Fund over 6 months, 22 years ago. Wellstone had then wired a portion, monthly, without fail, to an account ending in the same 4 digits John had memorized well enough to write down even after his mind had lost almost everything else. The account belonged to Willow Creek Care Home. I sat back. My hands were steady. My chest was not. "It's closed," I said out loud. "To no one, to everyone. Fund to shell to facility. 20 years, no gaps." Mary, sitting behind me, made a small sound. Not a sob. Just breath leaving her too fast. Richard's lawyer was a man named Aldous Fenn, gray-suited, unhurried, the kind of calm that costs $400 an hour. He set his pen down across the table from me 2 days later, in the interview room where I'd been asked to walk investigators through the financial chain. "Miss Collins believes a man with documented cognitive impairment can identify an account number from 2 decades ago." He said it like he was reading a weather report. "The state's entire timeline rests on a witness who calls his daughter, John, half the time and doesn't remember which floor his room is on. The number matches independently verified banking records," I said. "It doesn't matter if my father remembers what he ate for breakfast. It matters to a jury." Richard, across the table, hadn't spoken. He wore the same posture he'd worn at the wedding, chin level, eyes half-lidded, a man who still believed the room belonged to him. When I looked at him directly, he almost smiled. "You always did have your mother's stubborn little face," he said. I didn't answer that. I turned to David's affidavit instead, sworn 3 days earlier in a hospice room in Grandview, his oxygen line taped behind his ear, his signature shaking but legible. I witnessed Richard Morgan alter payroll authorization documents in March, 22 years ago. I did not report it because I was told, explicitly, that my job and my family's insurance depended on my silence. The forensic document examiner, a woman named Priya Natarajan, testified an hour later that the signature on the original embezzlement form was, with 99.6% confidence, not a match to any verified sample of Mary Collins's handwriting from that period, but was a strong match to a known sample of Richard Morgan's, disguised. Fenn's calm slipped exactly once. He looked at Richard. Richard looked at the table. That was the open loop closing, and a new one opening in its place. What would happen to the money now sitting in accounts nobody could touch fast enough? Linda came the next morning, alone, no lawyer of her own initially, though the DA got her one within the hour. She sat across from Ruiz and signed 11 pages without asking to read most of them twice. "I want full cooperation on the record," she said. "I want it noted I came forward before I was compelled." "Understood. And I want a room where Richard can't hear me say the rest." She told them about the disbursement approvals she'd signed years ago without asking questions, about a night in April when Richard came home smelling like scotch and said, calm as anything, that John Collins had stopped being a problem. She hadn't known what that meant until much later. She said she was ashamed to admit how much later. Daniel was in the hallway when I stepped out. He hadn't been allowed inside, and he hadn't tried to force it. He just stood there in a suit that no longer fit the man wearing it, holding 2 coffees, one of which he handed to me without a word. "My father called me this morning," he said, "from the holding facility. He wanted me to hire Fenn's firm to represent the family's interests." His words. The family's interests. What did you say? I told him I already knew what my interests were. He looked at the door Linda had gone through. "He's not going to apologize, Em. Not really. Not ever." "I know. I'm still choosing you. I want that said out loud, not implied." I didn't cry. I'd used up whatever tears I had for the year already. I just held the coffee and let it warm my hands. The arraignment was in a courtroom with fluorescent lights too bright for what was happening under them. The prosecutor, a woman named Denise Okafor, laid a single sheet in front of Richard. The summary page, 47 counts listed in a font too small for the weight of it. Fraud, forgery, aggravated assault, unlawful restraint, obstruction, money laundering through a registered charity. Richard read it slowly. Then he laughed, short, dry, no humor in it at all, and looked up, past Okafor, past Fenn, straight at me. "You're just like your mother." His voice was almost gentle. "Neither of you ever knew when to stop." "No," I said. "We just never knew how to give up." The paperwork on Denise Okafor's desk did not shrink for 3 months. It grew. I sat across from her in a county building on Front Street, watching her stack folders into 2 piles, thick and thicker. 47 counts, she said, but the ones that matter are simple. Embezzlement, forgery, aggravated kidnapping, concealment of a felony. She tapped the second pile. "This is the paper trail your hands built. 22 years of it." I didn't say anything. I'd stopped needing to fill silences with words somewhere around the 2nd week of depositions. "His assets are frozen," she said. "All of them. The house on Bexley Park Boulevard, the boat, the accounts in Linda's name he thought were safe." A judge signed off Tuesday. She slid a printout across the table. A list of numbers, 7 of them, each with a dollar sign and a line through it. Morgan Capital Partners lost 4 major clients this week alone. 2 more are reviewing the relationship. That's lawyer speak for gone. I thought about the man at the podium 11 weeks earlier, champagne raised, calling my mother a beggar. I set that image down. My arms still ached with the memory of carrying it. Linda called that same afternoon. Her voice was steadier than I'd ever heard it. "The divorce filing went through this morning," she said. I kept the house in Granville. He kept nothing but his name, and even that's mostly ruined now. A pause. I want you to know, I'm testifying against him in full. No immunity deal for the parts that matter. Denise offered me a partial one for the financial counts, but I told her I didn't want to hide behind it. Why not? Because your father spent 20 years in a room that wasn't his, answering to a name that wasn't his, she said. I spent 20 years in a house that was mine, saying nothing. I don't get to call that the smaller crime just because no one arrested me for it. I hadn't expected an apology to land like that, quiet, unadorned, and somehow heavier than if she'd cried. 2 weeks later, I drove to Riverside Methodist to see David Brooks. He was smaller than he'd been at the wedding, the oxygen line taped under his nose, a blanket pulled to his chest even though the room was warm. The chart at the foot of the bed said stage 4, and the nurse who let me in didn't need to tell me what that meant on a timeline. He'd made it to the grand jury 3 weeks earlier in a wheelchair, sworn in with his hand shaking, and given testimony so clean and so specific that Richard's attorney had asked for a recess just to regroup. They tell me the indictment held, he said, when I sat down. His voice was thinner than in the ballroom, but the eyes were the same. All 47. Because of you. Because of your mother's numbers, 22 years ago, and yours now. He turned his hand over on the blanket, palm up, an invitation. I took it. I used to think silence was survival. I had a mortgage, a daughter starting college, a company that owned my paycheck. I told myself keeping quiet was just being careful. His grip tightened briefly. It wasn't careful. It was a debt I let your mother pay instead of me. You don't owe me anything now. I know, he said. I'm not doing this to be even. I'm doing it because I'd like to die having said it out loud. He smiled, a small, dry thing. Turns out that's the only bill I still had left to settle. I stayed 40 minutes. When I left, I didn't cry until I was in the parking garage, sitting in my car with the engine off, and even then it wasn't loud. Not everyone chose the way David did. Richard's cousin Elaine sent a fruit basket to the house with a card that read, "Thinking of your family during this difficult time." No mention of Richard by name. No mention of Mary. No mention of the word sorry. 2 of his old golf partners called Daniel to say they hoped this wouldn't affect the friendship. Daniel didn't call them back. They're not sorry he did it, he said to me one evening, sitting on the back steps of the house on Delaware Avenue. They're sorry it became public. There's a difference, and I never used to be able to tell it apart before this year. Hudson Medical, under new ownership now, a health system out of Cincinnati that had absorbed it in a merger, issued a formal statement in October. My mother read it standing in the kitchen, glasses pushed up on her head, one hand flat on the counter, like she needed it to stay upright. It named her. It used the word wrongfully. It offered reinstatement of her professional record, 22 years too late, and a settlement figure. I watched her read twice before she folded the letter in half and set it down without a word. You don't have to say anything, I told her. I know, she said. I just don't know what the right thing sounds like yet. The doctors at Willow Creek's new facility, the transitional care unit John had been moved to, closer to Columbus, closer to us, sat me down in a small office off the therapy wing. Memory like his doesn't return all at once, the neurologist said, sliding a folder across the desk. It comes back in pieces. Sometimes a smell triggers it. Sometimes a voice. We can't predict which piece, or when. She closed the folder. But the therapy is working. The scans show it. I'd start hoping if I were you. On a Thursday in late October, I sat with him on a bench outside, the afternoon light flat and gold across the grass. He'd been quiet a long time, turning a leaf over in his fingers. Then he reached for my hand, held it the way David had held mine, and looked at me like he was trying to solve something. Emily, he said. Just that. My name in his mouth, for the first time in 29 years. He said it again, softer this time, like he was tasting the word. Emily. I knelt down next to the wheelchair, so he didn't have to look up. Dr. Patel had warned us not to expect too much. That recognition could flicker in and out like a bad signal, but he'd said my name twice now in the same afternoon, and I was going to take it. That's right, I said. I'm Emily. You had a red bike, he said. Training wheels. I never had a red bike. I'd had a hand-me-down blue one from a neighbor, rust on the handlebars, and I almost corrected him before I caught myself. The doctor said the memories would come back scrambled, mixed with things that never happened, other kids, other lives he'd half-lived in 20 years of fog. It didn't matter. He was reaching for me across a gap I used to think was unbridgeable, and I wasn't going to hand him a fact check. Something like that, I said. We brought him home to Mary's house on a Tuesday in December, 9 weeks after Willow Creek, 9 weeks after the van, after the 47 counts, after David Brooks's funeral, which I still hadn't fully let myself think about without my throat closing. The house was the same one-bedroom on Delaware Avenue that Mary had lived in since I was 8, except now there was a hospital bed in the second bedroom, and grab bars in the shower, and a folder from the VA on the kitchen counter about veteran caregiver benefits. None of us qualified for yet, and none of us cared. Daniel built the ramp himself. He'd taken a leave from the firm, his boss barely blinked, everyone had seen the news, and he spent 4 days in Mary's small backyard with a circular saw and a level, refusing help from anyone but a YouTube tutorial. I watched him from the kitchen window, sweat through his shirt, measuring the same board twice before he cut it. He wasn't an architect building something for a client. He was a man doing math with his hands because his mouth still didn't have the words for what his father had done. We planned the second wedding for the last Saturday in January. Nobody used the word wedding out loud at first. Mary called it the thing in the yard. Daniel called it Saturday, until John, 3 weeks in, looked at Mary across the dinner table and said, "Clear as anything. We never had a first dance." 29 years married and no first dance. Mary put her fork down. "You remember that?" "I remember what we didn't get," he said. "That part stays." There were 9 of us in the yard that Saturday. Mary, John, Daniel, me. Nora Alvarez, who'd taken 2 personal days from Willow Creek to come watch the man she used to check on every morning shift get married in a backyard instead of a day room. Priya Natrajan, who'd matched 62 signatures under a microscope and asked to be invited, almost shyly, like she wasn't sure she'd earned it. Linda Morgan, who showed up in a gray dress instead of black, sat in the back row and cried without apologizing for it. Detective Ruiz, off duty in jeans. And Denise Okafor, the prosecutor, who couldn't stay for the ceremony but dropped off a bottle of sparkling cider because John, she'd been told, wasn't supposed to drink with his medication.
No microphone.
No planner with a headset. A folding table from Mary's garage held a cake from the Kroger on Sawmill Road, and somebody, I think Nora, had strung white lights through the fence even though the ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon, and we wouldn't need them for hours. Mary wore blue, not white. "White already happened," she told me, fixing the collar of my father's shirt, her hands steady in a way I hadn't seen since before the Ritz. "This one's just for saying the parts we skipped." When it was John's turn to speak, he held Mary's hands and looked at a spot somewhere over her shoulder, chasing a sentence I could see him losing and finding. "I looked for you," he said. "I don't remember the finding. I remember the looking. That part never left, even when the rest did." Mary's voice didn't shake. "I stopped looking. I need you to know that." I stopped, and I let myself believe the worst thing anyone ever told me about you.
"You were tired," he said.
"I don't blame tired." She kissed him before he could see her cry. Then it was my turn, and Daniel put a hand on my back and nudged me toward the middle of the grass, where somebody had set a small speaker on a lawn chair. Nora hit play. It was an old song, something Mary said used to come out of the kitchen radio when I was small, back before I had any memory of my own to hold it in. I put my hand in my father's, and he stood, slower than he used to, faster than the doctors expected, and he found the rhythm before he found the words for what he was doing. His feet remembered before his mind caught up. 1 step. Turn. 1 step. "You're good at this," I told him. "I had practice," he said. "Waiting rooms. I used to dance by myself." Nobody tells you that's what you do when you don't remember who you're saving the dance for. I didn't answer that. I just held on, watching his shoes find the grass, thinking that some things get buried so deep they stop being memory and start being body, muscle, bone, the kind of truth that outlasts even the mind that carried it. 20 years, a forged signature, and a stolen name almost erased a man from his own family. But the numbers he wrote on a scrap of paper and hid under a mattress outlasted every lie built to bury them. Silence protects the liar for exactly as long as no one asks the right question. The truth doesn't need a voice to survive. It just needs someone willing to keep counting.